The finger was from a previously unknown and extinct hominin subspecies. These previously unknown ancestors were christened with the name Denisovan.
Firstly, we know that a further tooth that was found in the Denisova cave, but they didn't really know too much about it, has now been confirmed to be that of a Denisovan woman. It's about 125,000 years old. And this confirms that the Denisovans were in this area for a much longer period than had initially been suggested. And that's many, many generations. That means that they were an incredibly developed population.
The Denisovans had to be much more advanced than what they're being credited with. I say that because of the discovery of a piece of jewelry that they found in the original Denisovan cave that dated 40,000 years ago. It was made of a green polished rock, and anthropologists believe that this jewelry was only worn on very special occasions. That indicates a culture. It indicates art. It indicates a higher understanding of reality. These aren't people that were simply clubbing animals to death and using their furs. These were people that were literally constructing jewelry. That's something a lot of anthropologists are uneasy with, because it shows a depth of understanding and beauty in their culture that really shouldn't have existed with such ancient hominids.
The archaeologists kept digging a bit more, as they tend to do, and they found that when they got to a layer that's about 380,000 years, they found tools there, they found a needle, they found certain artifacts that looked like bracelets and other ornaments, and they also found a ring which has been beautifully shaped out of rock. It has been obviously machined and polished.
Beautiful bone needles have been found in the Denisova cave, suggesting that the Denisovans wore tailored clothing. Horse DNA has also been found inside the cave itself, suggesting that the Denisovans not only hunted horses, but probably domesticated them and may even have ridden horses. And this is probably tens of thousands of years before it was even thought possible that you could ride horses, something that was considered conventionally to only have occurred in Bronze Age times. And yet here we have people 40 to 50,000 years ago who were riding horses, domesticating them, catching them.
If this scientific data is true, then how could these ancient ancestors shed new light on our evolution? Perhaps it's possible that they not only date back hundreds of thousands of years earlier than we had thought, but to another world entirely. A world where a certain species survived among these evolved creatures.
Baalbek is one of the big enigmas of which there is very little answers. We're talking about a huge complex that was constructed during Roman times, a massive temple dedicated to the god Jupiter. Amongst the foundations of this incredible complex are stone blocks weighing around 1,000 tons apiece. But the big question comes, did they reuse those stones, those big ones, the 1,000-tonners? That's the thing. And if they did reuse them, who the hell created those stones in the first place, and why so large?
Some will say that it was superhuman how these massive stones were carved. It could be done. It could be done with rollers, block and tackle. It would be quite an effort, and there was a reason to do it. The temple is on a hill. You would need very, very strong retaining walls. Huge pieces of stone are useful in that regard. So there's a practical answer. But the more magical speculation is there must have been some special purpose to this location and these massive stones that is beyond our current understanding. The reason for them would be to build very powerful retaining walls so that this temple would last forever.
come round the corner onto the west side of the wall, and there you find the famous trilithon, which is curious, freestanding, unconnected megalithic wall, which doesn't look much like other Roman stuff, actually. The three giant blocks that surrounds the Temple of Jupiter. And each of those blocks weighs more than 900 tons. And they are placed so perfectly into position that you cannot get a sheet of paper into the joints. And they're 20 feet above the ground. And then we have another thing, which is if you go to the supposed quarry from which the Baalbek stones were taken, you find three really humongous blocks of stone. Two of them have been well known for the last 100 years or so. One's called, I don't know why, it's called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. You're dwarfed by the scale of the thing. This block weighs 1,000 tons. It's sticking up at a kind of angle. It's been cleanly separated from the bedrock underneath. There's a cut, and it's just sitting there. Across the road is a second giant block. That one is calculated to weigh 1,460 tons, still sitting there in place in the quarry and only discovered by the archaeologists in 2014 because it was covered by sediment. So the archaeologists say the Romans did everything. The Romans made those megalithic blocks. To me, this is, just a very un-Roman thing to do. The Romans were extremely pragmatic people. If they had quarried those blocks, even if they had found they couldn't move them, they would not have left them there. The Romans were never involved with those blocks. They didn't even know those blocks were there. I think we are looking at, if you like, an antediluvian presence at Baalbek. And I think in some way the Romans tapped into that and honored that with their 54 columns around the Temple of Jupiter.
As Stonehenge slowly falls into ruin, scientists are digging deeper for answers about the true purpose of these stone megaliths. The site was comprised of an inner circle of smaller bluestones set in a horseshoe arrangement, surrounded by a larger external wall of 60-million-year-old silicified Sarsen sandstones. 50 remain standing today.
One of the first things about Stonehenge is we are so familiar with the monument having those huge trilithons and being this perfect circle containing 30 megaliths with 30 lintels on top. Now that is called Stonehenge Phase 2. It was, according to Orthodox archaeology, built around about 2500 BC.
There is a theory that in addition to the influence of the sun and the moon and the power of the eclipses, that Stonehenge has a connection with the influence of Saturn. This comes from a theory that was proposed, I believe, in the 1980s originally, that the inner so-called horseshoe of stones that are made of bluestone, which reflected this influence, and that because they were directional, they sort of pointed towards the influence of Saturn.
Stonehenge may have been built in part as a religious homage to where these people believed they originated from.
Now, if we visualize this on the ground, we need to see that Stonehenge represents Saturn, and it has 30 lintels going around it. And Saturn takes exactly 30 years to make one round of the zodiac. Any astronomer and an astrologer will tell you that's called a Saturn return. It's a 30-year cycle. So I feel that's why there was 30 lintels at Stonehenge. Our ancient ancestors did everything for a meaning. Nothing was by chance. Everything had a metaphysical and a physical property in the ancient world of Stonehenge.
Saturn is known to be the kind of the harsh taskmaster. It's where we get things like tough love, sort of. It's not an evil thing, but it's almost like you have to prune the tree in order to exacerbate growth. Sometimes we need a little toughness just to really grow to our full potential. Saturn imposes the limitations of time and space. It's also the seventh sphere, which is the highest point of the world soul. It's the point where eternity becomes creation.
It gave Stonehenge a quite dark aspect because Saturn is associated with the colour black, with death, mortality and the end of time, basically. The association with time, I think, is very important because these stone circles often seem to reflect the idea of the passage of time.
Saturn is a fascinating planet. Time itself, the old devil being time, because what do we know as humans? The one thing we all run up against that we cannot defeat is time. So Saturn, as this sort of ring lord, actually, it was considered a very destructive planet. Each planet has a certain resonance. Mars for war, Pluto is sort of the outlier, Venus is for love, but Saturn has been this sort of monster in mythological history.
You had this understanding of Saturn and Kronos as being the sort of governors of time. There were certain mechanistic aspects of it, but it was also very fluid, and you have to associate the fact that there were cycles within cycles within cycles. So that's why we have to pay attention to them, because our livelihood, our survival depends on the understanding of these long cycles. Stonehenge is many, many layers. And yes, it's a place of learning, it's a place of fertility, it's a place of wisdom, it's a place of gathering, and of course it's an astronomical marker and an